Yeah, honored guests, good morning. Uh, we're very happy that you've decided to attend the 28th conference of Muwatin. It's a hybrid setting at State University and the virtual space. It's titled Societal Change Actors, Shrinking Spaces, and Resilience Strategies. However, please allow me at the beginning to get your note on some technical issues, especially things that this virtual world imposes on us. We hope that all who are on the Zoom access to keep your self muted at all times, except when you're given the chance to speak. We hope that our followers via Zoom to use the raise hand feature, and you will be converted to panelists just to speak. This feature is in the reactions space. You can listen to interpretation through clicking on interpretation icon, and then select English, or listen to the speaker directly through putting it off, and we will send the instructions on this. And so please mute audio as well. As for the audience here with us in this room, please, we would ask you to keep your distance away and using sanitizers. There would be also interpretation in the room, so would you please get the devices from the entrance of the hall. On the coming 2 days, we're going to work together on working on together and making this change in Palestine, and in a way to try to open about working together and resilience in the open space. And we will listen together to the best experts with us today. Heinrich Ball is the green political movement that have developed worldwide in return or in response for the liberal and conservative movements. It is one of the first funders of Muwatin. Heinrich Ball. It supports this conference for the 28th time, and I call on the director of Heinrich Ball, please, to give us her word. سيداتي وسادتي شكرا
On
لكم.
behalf of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, Palestine and Jordan, I warmly welcome you to Muwatin's 28th annual conference titled Societal Change Actors, Shrinking Spaces, and Resilience Strategies. It's our great pleasure to support again the annual conference of Muwatin, which has become both a tradition and a symbol of our very important partnership. My colleague, Dr. Riham Halasse, who is leading our Human Rights and Democracy program, is also here present today. So, marhaba, Riham. The Heinrich Böll Foundation has been partnering with Muwatin since the 19th, even before the Palestine and Jordan office was opened in Ramallah, end of the 90s. As our oldest partner, we are very proud of the cooperation with Muwatin and the work that we have achieved together over the years. Thanks a lot to you, Dr. Jamil, and your team for organizing this important conference. The Heinrich Böll Foundation is part of the Green political movement and seeks to encourage cross-border initiative and cooperation. Together with our local partners, HBS Palestine and Jordan is active in three main fields: environmental justice, human rights and democracy, and political analysis and international relations. Shrinking civil society space is a global trend, unfortunately. Societal actors like NGOs that are working for social justice, human rights, environmental protection, and a better participation of minorities are coming more and more under pressure and facing several obstacles to their work. Over the last 10 years, an increasing number of governments have adopted new laws and practices that constrain civic space, the set of conditions that allow civil society actors and individuals to organize, participate, and communicate freely and without discrimination, and in doing so influence the political and social structure around them. Governments often use new legislation to close civil society space by stressing the need for active regulation and while presenting as means to prevent fraud and so-called questionable funding. In reality, such legislations are instrumental to silence any form of promoting and defending human rights and to weaken any internal opposition. Annual reports from 21, so the last year, with a special focus on shrinking space, come to the result that only 3% of world population live in countries with an open public civil society, while 2/3 live in authoritarian states or dictatorships. Those in power restrict the free exercise of fundamental rights through a combination of legal and practical restrictions. Civil society organizations exist, but state agencies attempt to discredit and dismantle them, including through civilians, bureaucratic harassment, and public humiliation. Citizens have the fundamental right to assemble peacefully, but are often dispersed by security forces. There is room for non-governmental media and editorial independence, but journalists are subject to physical assault and defamation charges. They therefore feel compelled to self-censor. Practitioners and academics agree that supporting civil society actors is central to a successful consolidation of young democracies and value-based global legal norms orientated development of democracies. Or, with regard and a special focus to Palestine, a vivid civil society is an important basis for value-based political self-determination. As the backbone of civil society, non-governmental organizations exemplify the promotion of civil rights and liberties and public accountability to support for gender equality or increased public sector effectiveness in implementing a wide range of political goals. This conference aims to take a look at the restrictions on the scope of action and shed lights on different facets. Ahead of us are 2 days of debating how different civil society actors are coming under pressure in OPT and how they are responding. A special focus is given, and I think this is very important to discuss also resilience strategies, how to deal with these difficult challenges and how societal actors are able to continue with their important work in the future. In the Israel-Palestine context, restrictions of civil and political rights, such as freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly, and the right to public participation are increasing. At the same time, NGOs and individual activists and human rights defenders are faced with defamation claims designed to intimidate and silence them. I think it's totally clear that civil society can only develop its potential if it has sufficient and social and legal scope for action. I'm very much looking forward to the various sessions tackling the topic of shrinking spaces from diverse perspectives and experiences, and to the presentation of the papers by different scholars. I'm particularly curious about the discussions between academia and practitioners that are present here today, especially with an eye on resilient strategies and how to handle the increasing shrinking space. It is very, very important to use these 2 days as an open space for exchange and learning from each other. Last but not least, I thank a lot also to Birzeit University for hosting this event as a leading educational institution and as an intellectual hub here in Palestine. I'm wishing us all inspiring days. Shukran jazilan.
Thank you.
Ever since Muwatin Institute was established in Birzeit University, the administration of the institute has been dedicating the achievements of Muwatin, which is the organizer of this conference, and on enhancing the renewed identity of this institute. I call on Mr. Jamil Salim, head of the conference committee, to share his comments. Good morning, everyone. We are here today in this annual 28th conference under the title Societal Change Actors, Shrinking Spaces and Resilience Strategies. This title did not come out of nowhere. Everybody knows and that the work sphere and the title did not come out of nowhere. Everyone knows and sees that the scope of work in the public sphere is constantly shrinking. So it is now talking about closing spaces. The number of societal movements, social movements of blackmail, repression, harassment, and suffocation is on the rise also, not only here. According to the 2022 Atlas of the Civil Society, we are living in the majority of the people are in the majority of states, there are some authoritarian practices that only restrict the daily political, social, and democratic life of the citizens, of the public. We notice today that in this new age, especially after the COVID pandemic, is the era of permanent monitoring of societies and peoples who are living in an unprecedented situation and taking non-standard measures and measures by various regimes to restrict many rights and freedoms. Since some time, countries have used populist narratives, intimidation tactics, and systematic muzzling and intimidation with the aim of passing policies that serve the political and economic elites and to control the society, in addition to narrowing the spaces for movements, gatherings, assemblies, and unions seeking to bring about radical changes in societies. The majority countries, including the countries in our Arab surroundings, have manifested their repressive practices towards any attempt to change based on the concept of emergency and exception. And there had been excessive and arbitrary use of force through exceptional laws, as well as the disruption of democratic processes such as candidacy and elections. This situation only presents a structural temptation for the state to extend its authority at the expense of the rights and freedoms of its citizens. Many have tried to put the state of exception we live in today under the framework of law. Some might believe that the law or some of its provisions will inevitably be disrupted in certain cases imposed by certain circumstances, such as the crisis we live in today, and that the mechanisms of law are able to regulate the transition from the normal situation and return to it. If this is followed by the law that has the ability to regulate the formal requirements for declaring a state of emergency and the ability to establish procedures that allow for monitoring compliance with the requirements. In other words, the emergency and the state of exception is nothing but a state of establishing the law or a state emanating from the confines of the law. And it is able to regulate and set controls on it. Such were some of the arguments that tried to keep the order prevailing today in the fold of liberal law. There are attempts to ensure that the law and its sovereignty are in place over the state of emergency. So instead of saying that the origin is rights, whether social, economic, or political, and that the emergency represents an exceptional case, the picture seems to be reversed. We have even reached a situation that can be called the institutionalized state of exception, in which case the ruling entities or the ruling elites singularize the society, or in which society is exposed before the will of these elites who bring all powers into their hands and are armed with the latest types of weapons, techniques, algorithms, and reactionary and populist ideologies. Here, in this case, that is the state of exception, represents, in the words of Italian theorist Giorgio Agamben, a situation in which the coercive force of law remains in force without the law having any content. This trend sees that every attempt aimed at placing the state of exception under the law is doomed to failure, as it is impossible for the law and rights that are already suspended from working to have the binding force to control the exceptional powers exercised by the ruler. In other words, this exception is a situation in whose existence it exceeds the scope of the law. Here, the danger lies in turning the exception into a natural state, and that public space into an empty space of standards, even moral standards, and for the policies and culture of fear based on the exception hypothesis to become the norm. And if the fear is rooted and deepened in a way that those affected by it do not see that there is room for them to maneuver in their actions and work, and because of this they refrain from protesting or political action, and do not think about social alternatives, let alone expressing them, the view of danger turns into in itself, because the reluctance to for a public protest or out of fear provides opportunities for those who spread fear and instill it in others. The sooner those who believe that they are defending rights and freedoms are neutral, the more freedom will be enjoyed by the security authorities, the repressive authorities, and with them some economic lamentations. And the more they hide their voices in the face of intimidation, the more they will face greater isolation among the ranks of the silent majority, even if they keep their courageous ideas a secret. And in order to address this situation and its repercussions, we have to use some concept tools that are able to analyze the situation, the reality, and its components in order to diagnose it and study the revolution and rebellious forms under the popular or the system. And in addition, regardless or nevertheless, or in spite of the crisis and the state of oppression and the shrinking that we are living today, we hope through the sessions of this conference to be able to confront such concepts such as that we are restricted, and to be able to contribute in reflecting and thinking together as tools of the struggle of the actors of societal change. Today we are aiming to contribute to opening the dialogue for academics. We will be joined by a number of researchers, practitioners from 4 continents. They will be addressing a number of concepts and issues as explained in the conference brochure. The first session will be speaking about the concept of societal change actors, and throughout the session there will be a number of concepts and the initiatives for change will be discussed and addressed. In addition, cases from Palestine, Lebanon, Tunis, and Europe and Southern America, such will be rising issues about resilience under neoliberal and authoritarian policies or regimes across the world. In the third session of today's will be on the virtual, will be online at 7 p.m. At the end, please allow me to welcome you at the Muwatin Institute in Birzeit University, and thank everybody who contributed to the sessions and organizing this event and thanks for the Heinrich Böll institution for their continuous support. Thank you so much.
With this, we'll be done with the welcoming words. Supposedly, we suppose the university's president was supposed to be with us. Regretfully, he won't be with us, and we won't have. So we will move now right away to the first session. It's a civil society organization. It's going to be moderated by Jamil Sadem. Please, let's stick to the, on behalf of myself and the Institute of Muwatin, we welcome you again, and we wish you all the best. Thank you. Good morning again. I know that in the first session, I know we're 10 minutes late, but I will be brief and as noted in the manual of the folder, and we have 3 speakers with us. Ahmed is with us. He's with us. Okay, he has COVID, but he's up. And Dr. Rula Abi Habib Khouri. So just a small introduction about the speakers, and then we start. And please commit to this, because the first speaker is Mudar Qassis. Mudar his counter revolution and the public sphere, and Dr. Mudar is the director of Karama initiatives and the director of Muwatin and the director of public. The second speaker is Rula Abi Habib Khouri. Rula, she's Revolutions Without a Revolution. She's a professor of sociology and the director of Center of the Study of the Modern Arab World at St. Joseph's University in Beirut. She chaired the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the same university between 2008 and 2017. Her main research interests revolve around sociological theory, political sociology, and the sociology of the Lebanese society. The third speaker is Mr. Ahmed Al-Laham. He's about uh, and Ahmed is an assistant researcher at Muwatin Institute for Democracy and Human Rights and a PhD student at the University of Zaragoza in Spain. We start with you, Dr. Mudar. Good morning, all. When I've set that title, I found out that it was a bit difficult. So details are many, revolution and displacement and so on. So the only solution that I had in mind is to intensify this paper. So, and I'm sorry for the intensity of this. I'm going to read just to commit to the time. And I hope that some things would be missing, but then during the Q&A session, we'll have the chance to talk more into details. Societal change differs from historical transformation, but it contributes to determining the fate of the latter. We should not be described, the adoption of a social security law in Palestine should not be described as a historical transformation, but the existence of a social security law will play a non-secondary role in determining the nature of the Palestinian state. As emergence will constitute a historical transformation, and the idea here is it's not about that every social action and transformation action is a revolutionary action. So the accumulation of such actions could be revolutionary. One difference between the two is that the process of social change is a continuous process, often a linear process, while historical transformations are seen in leaps and accompanied by structural transformations. In general, in order to limit the discussion about the actors of social change outside the scope of the revolution, it is possible to accept defining the act of social change by the cumulative action that changes the current situation to a degree that remains within what can be called the reform that takes place within the existing system. And it works either in a conscious way or acquired by fragmentation, and not only to change it radically, even if the goal is in the long run to replace it. The revolutionary change is carried out by the revolutionaries and those who seek to destroy and crush the existing system and not to work within it. The actual role of revolutionaries, revolution, begins after the regime reaches a state in which its continuation is not possible. This situation has arisen already, and in many cases, suddenly by an unplanned and spontaneous act. As for the success of a revolution, it depends on the presence of the agents of change, their willingness, organization, programs, and their ability to engage in a process of building a new system instead of fragmenting and eroding the old one. The act of social change necessarily constitutes an interaction between societal components and necessarily constitutes a present struggle for the future. In the structure of every society whose members are not equal, there should be a conflict. As for the issues of conflict and its form, they are related to two things. First, the power relations embedded in the existing structures, and the second is the awareness of those wishing to change the current reality of the necessity, possibility, and the nature of the desired change and their possessiveness of its tools. The scope in which the conflict takes place is what we call the public space. Thus, public space is an abstract concept that does not refer to something concrete, but rather to a set of interactions that we call the domain in which public space occurs. The interactions that define the public space and its boundaries are characterized by being the same mechanism through which the nature, conditions, rules, and origins of those relationships between people that aim directly or indirectly to form a change of a society, its environment, defining its features, and formulating its future. In other words, the public space is the context of non-intimate social relations because the latter, which is intimate, does not and should not relate to what affects the life and future of a society as a whole. Usually, intimate relations are in public space and not private space and not public space. It seems to me that many perceive the public space mechanically as a vessel in which people interact, but this perception is not good enough. Firstly, because it's not right, because it's not normal as public space and despite that there are places that symbolize it. And secondly, because one of the consequences of this perception is that it allows the confusing between the conflict of interests and that are related to the public private sector on the one hand and controlling it on the other hand. While the conflict of interests can be linked to a debate among the jurists. Attempts to control the public space are like closing the door of ijtihad or trying the best. And this closure is a characteristic of the new liberal era and the harbingers of fascism and its context. As for the tools used to close the door of ijtihad, this is the subject of this intervention. Before going into this discussion, I find that I have to answer a number of questions posed by the new tools for social interaction, which are digital tools. Do we consider the virtual space as a public space? Since this space is used partially in general social interactions and is used to shape and change the society and its environment, defining its features and formulating its feature, it is certainly a public space. However, the ability of a party to form it individually and the possibility of blocking its actors. And because it is a space based on a single commodity basis, in contrast to the ordinary public space that is based on various foundations, including commodities, but is not single, it is a public space of a special kind that resembles a black market that's controlled by the mafia. It's a public sphere, but handling it and dealing with it is controlled by one party, or rather a unified party, according to its own considerations. And I would like here to point out in response to an unexpected objection that the multiplicity of parties does not prevent their unity. It's also worth noting that while this approach clearly applies to the so-called social media, it remains valid for all virtual spaces, and that the existence of alternative and opposing virtual spaces and the like does not negate the general character. Those, of course, are exceptions, even if they're not many. Since and the public space is the same context of the social interactions that define it, then there is a mutual condition between the social context and social interactions. And that would show the consistent, and the interaction is done through the determining the narrowness, and plus like the political space and political system production relations and everything that would define the feature of the historical era of society. Thus, social struggles over changing and or maintaining and enhancing reality are necessarily struggles over public space. Therefore, the various forms of usurpation of public space are the tools of reactionary and conservative social forces that take advantage of the status quo and suppress all attempts to change for the change in different ways. The methods of suppressing change vary according to their nature in terms of their impact on one of the stages of the intended change process: sterilization, abortion, mutilation, strangulation, alienation, substitution, settlement, and expropriation are all geared toward preventing any real change to the status quo using one of the three possible techniques. The first is to prevent the emergence of the act of change, such as curbing the will through ideological framing or creating false awareness and turning public issues into intimate issues that are to be addressed in a private space, or preoccupying people with their life issues by foreclosure ways in ways that are like a counter revolution in a way that is that would the expropriation of public space, its settlement, and its displacement. The second is the societal change towards something is like the popularism and the adoption of social. The third is to have opposing through expulsion, banishment, exile, imprisonment, and so on. On the other hand, there are various techniques that aim to consolidate the status quo, preserving and developing the interest of the dominant powers, regardless of the presence or absence of acts of resistance. These technologies lie in creating value systems that beautify the current situation, call for patience, and convince the society that it was not possible to be more creative than it was, and offer promises for a better future. If not today, then tomorrow, and if not in the world, then in the later, in the other life. And they work to raise the responsibility of the dominant forces of the status quo and to attribute themselves, the whole individual society and the forces of resistance, the responsibility for the failure to reach or a better situation. Just like is happening with Birzeit University administration that holds the workers' union responsible for the university's financial crisis, and before that, it holds the university's private sector is that's responsible for the failure to find employment for graduates. Although it's clear that the private sector is unable to expand the labor market, yet it insists that universities must adapt itself to the needs of this market. And the market is narrow. It's the employment is so big, and they say that the universities does not really do well, despite the absence of these needs. It insists on suppressing the cooperative patterns of work, in addition to the constant attack on the idea of the public sector, despite its absence. Since every act of change reshapes the public space, the widening of the public space is an indication of the effect of the act. Although expanding the public space does not necessarily mean changing it, its continuous expansion causes a steady change in the ingredients of the success of acts of change. This is the reason why conflict over public space is an issue, regardless of the issue of conflicts. This specifically means that there is a struggle over the right to participate in shaping the public space. Conservative and reactionary forces want to monopolize the change process and limiting it to what serves their hegemony using one of the techniques we've mentioned earlier. The first technique does not need examples or explanation. The hegemonic powers use the authority, whether by law or in force or otherwise, to declare every attempt to change outside the national line. This is exactly what is happening today in Iran to suppress the protesters against the symbols of the regime, whether these symbols are the supreme leader or the hijab. This was the Palestinian Authority's reaction to the teacher strike, which means the canceling of elections as well. The second technique is more complex. Examples of it is that the conservative and reactionary forces confront the societal security bill and push all their might to harness the tools of change to ban it. This is how change was suppressed using to the change direction. So in the case of the Social Security Act, the issues of workers' lives, their future, and their social security has been redirected to the issue of the authorities' untrustworthiness. The third technique, which is more direct and fierceness, it's when conservative, reactionary, and authoritarian forces declare war and the impossibility of coexistence of the different interests, thus criminalizing the opposition opinion of the hegemonic power, giving an existential character to the conflict, and legitimizing the physical exclusion of of opinion by assassinating them, confiscating their resources, expelling them, deporting them, exiling them, imprisoning them, and other acts that constitute the opposite of the act of change by liquidating what they can do. It's not only limited to committing this act against the occupation, but it's practiced by whoever expels a worker who sought to form a union, or whoever deprives a university professor of her immunity because of the opinions and positions, which is a well-known and repeated phenomenon in Western universities, despite their claim to the contrary. Of course, these techniques take primitive and more egregious forms when they can't make political and personal loyalty a condition of employment, even if this takes on a bureaucratic character under the pretext of higher national interest or a clan character. Then, in any case, it's an act of naked domination. In addition to these technologies, there are others that can be described as supporting technologies for the basic technologies, which goal is to strengthen and perpetuate the project of domination and enhance the effectiveness of basic technologies. And this group of technologies share that they work on attacking the natural environment and filtering the time and place necessary to effect change by monopolizing and usurping the public space through maybe urbanization that replaces the public spaces, or through lending that makes the borrower obligated in the future, or through settlement where the place is literally robbed. And the additional technique is the attack on the basis of living and the liquidation of resources, starting with water, passing through personal documents into jobs, and the various types of oppression and affronting dignity in a way that pushes those who can be an agent of change to move away from that place through displacement and migration, literally, or self-exclusion and isolation and distancing from the public affairs and other ways of embodying alienation. Of course, all this is accompanied by the establishment and dissemination of a general awareness and a prevailing culture which raises the status of the personal and self and individual in various ways and under various slogans, not the least is which is leadership and creativity, and not the last of which is positionalism, which in its it entirely leads to a redirection of the will within the actors who continue to seek. So they are, but they seek to improve themselves and to become more worthy, not by what they produce themselves, but by what the system that presents them with the rights provides them as opportunities worth seizing. Thus, it is clear that the counter-revolution precedes the revolution in order to anticipate the possibility of its occurrence, sterilizing the society and blocking the possibility of change are the main tools that prevent revolution from occurring for a while. But what's more terrible is that all this cannot prevent the historical change, whether through revolution, war, or others, and it can make the price of a change very high and make the transaction process longer and more difficult, and will make the outcomes of the change more fragile and worse. So, as for the struggle of over the public space is a struggle over the equality of the future and the quality to the way towards it. The future is inevitably coming, but its characteristics are threatened. The issue of public space is the reason for enabling us to struggle in defense of the public space, despite its physical absence, because the concrete space for the process of every action is an element that constitutes the public space. Societal change is cumulative if it is followed in a specific direction, even if it is related to different topics. Learning, national struggle, union struggle, the feminist struggle, all these and others are acts of change that liberate the public space and ward off its negativity and those who seek to monopolize it. And not every act of change needs to be revolutionary in order to contribute to the revolution, but rather it brings the revolution closer and increases the chances of its success. Awareness and having a vision of the world is a prerequisite for the non spontaneous and unmotivated change action behind the populist leaders, whether they seek to redirect the change action in order to stave off the revolution or are working to bring about the revolution at the wrong time. Awareness and vision formation require the ability to deep analyze and understand reality, determine the possibilities of change according to data, and then engaging in the process of change with courage, with an accurate awareness of who are the allies, enemies, and a sound assessment of the capabilities. Thank you very much.
Let's move to the word by Ms. Rula Abi Harbi Bhouri. Good morning. Would you like me? Yes, we would like you to switch on your camera. Good morning. I will try to speak in Arabic. Yesterday I asked Mudar if it's okay in some areas to speak in the Lebanese Arabic, and he said okay. So I would start with Arabic, and then if I switch to English, please excuse me in my daily life. I'm very much honored to be with you this morning, and I would like to warmly thank Birzeit University and Muwatin Institute for Democracy and Human Rights, as well as the organizing committee and the Heinrich Boll organizations, mainly Mr. Mudar Kassis, for giving me the opportunity of speaking before you. I also extend my many thanks to Ms. Joyce Kashua for her patience and her very efficient coordination of this conference. It seems after I heard Mudar Kassis that my presentation will be studying a case. I will be speaking about the revolution in Lebanon. My intervention is revolutionists without revolution. Since 10 years, the society at the Qudus Yusuf University in Beirut decided to come up with a new course called the Lebanese Society Family Sectarian Political Sectarianism and religious parties. I still recall establishing the first group of students who thought that I was trying to try to work on the Lebanese situation, the currency that uses the U.S. currency, and ever since the war ended in 1999, and after the imposed laws on Lebanon by the end of 2019, students themselves who preferred not care about the frustrating viewpoints. They were the ones who were filling the streets on the social media, asking for immediate political change, and attacking the political class with the very clear words and statements. Some of those students called me after the revolution, the eruption of the revolution, saying that I was correct, but I disappointed them when I talked about the different my different viewpoints. I think they did not realize the serious situation only after it was too late, and they were really mad at the repercussions or the consequences of the change, but not the reasons for the change. I was quite aware that when some of the issues or topics are to be discussed that were supposed to be discussed as a society post the war, and when it seemed like a dead end, there was the anger that replaced analysis, and of course the popular movements in Lebanon, mainly the expansion of the public sphere, as opposed to what I heard so far. I would be speaking about the expansion of the public sphere. Despite the oppression of the uprising of October 2019 in Lebanon, Lebanon has witnessed an expansion actually in the public sphere starting on that date. Comparing to the social movements in the 70s and 80s and 90s, there had been the October action that became more stronger and more focused at the time and more radical. And this included, its demands included a number of topics that were not addressed before, such as overthrowing the regime and replacing all the political members by others, also canceling the patriarchy and imposing, actually refusing dictations by the banks, canceling sectarianism, and supporting women's rights and the feminist and LGBT rights. The demonstrators were more diverse. The demonstrators were more diverse during the protests and demonstrations. The bourgeois and right-wing parties included the communists, non-politicians, anarchists, housewives, teachers, poets, psychologists. They were all across the public sphere, and the center of Beirut was transformed to a place by tents that became popular universities with citizens from the marginalized areas and isolated areas. The youth went to the tents. They wanted to understand or try to relearn the political work. There was a freedom of expression, and the politicians started to use curses and bad words. The supporters of this action saw this collapse of the existing skeletons as a necessary step, to bring the country to progress. And they saw in these protests and demonstrations as a historic opportunity to build a new law. And the citizens became free of loyalties and were directed towards competency and straightforward. These protests became a daily event. It did not, however, it was not only because the oppression, but because of the common ground among the angry crowds. And this there was an argument that this paper that would undermine the areas or change spheres based or maybe due to the oppression policies in Lebanon. The title that I chose, Revolutionists, not revolution, is not an accusation, but rather a comment or a note. There had been so many topics on the research, and there had been some consensus. There is a big number of factors, cultural factors and structural factors that cannot be overcome easily. The other title is an attempt to identify the history of awakening. You heard about awakening. You can call it action, uprising. We'd be reaching that point at later. The government's declaration about imposing attacks on the WhatsApp application was enough or adequate to launch a popular protest, unprecedented popular protests in Lebanon on October 17, 2019, after 30 years of the sectarian agreement. The angry citizens assembled on Jisr, on Shahab, on the Shahab bridge, which linked the Lebanon, Beirut, the capital at the time, and it was looked at as a spontaneous action, and it was trying to it goes back to the serious dangers and risks that Lebanon suffered from since the eruption of the war in 1990. Lifting the Syrian custody after the Rafiq al-Hariri, after the late Rafiq Hariri, this opened the road for more political competition among the sectors, and based on competitions dedicated also, and that also took the shape of nepotism interests, and also the overflow of the Syrian refugees into Lebanon, fleeing from the war that started 2012, and that added more pressure on the country. In 2015, the actors in the civil society started organizing protests condemning the bad administration of the waste management and the waste dumps. Gradually, the Lebanese became aware of the economic and financial serious economic and financial crisis, and the lack of accessing services, the reduced Lebanese lira value, and the dramatic reduction of the value of the lira, the Beirut harbor explosion, that all brought the country into a complete destruction. In addition to that, the reactions to this popular uprising was not far from the situation, from the political. We are in a country that is used to the conspiracy theories, and therefore we've seen many of those who make doubts, who reject the spontaneous actions, and they were asking about the timing of those uprisings, and we're talking about a revolution. I would not go into details of such theories that can be discussed later if there are questions. The third subtitle is who are the change actors? The absence, the deliberate absence of leadership inside the revolution, in addition to the many visions inside the groups, or it does not has not identified the actors in this action. We find the reformists, the liberals, the non-politicians. We found the Communist Party, the left-wing parties, who were happy about their ability to rehabilitate the proletariat as a basic actor in history. There were also members and supporters from political parties who would want to reinvent their own picture and cover or beautify their picture, their political images. We had many groups of artists from all spheres, and last but not least, there were the non-government organizations and the activists. While the TV channels who supported the revolution tried to market the movement through focusing on three main groups: women, youth, and the marginalized groups and the outskirts and the far remote areas from Beirut. Those who were on the ground were realizing that the economic situation, the intellectuals were active strongly in this revolution in the first few months. Actually, some emphasize that it is impossible that the social change actors in Lebanon would be neutral or independent. Some might say that the revolution is a revised copy of the March 14 alliance back in 2005, which is also opposed by the Hezbollah movement. Those actors refuse this opinion, of course, and they are represented today in the parliament through the change parliamentarians, and they are not from the political parliament members. This movement had its excessive demands beginning at 18 October 2019 in many of the Lebanese cities. Demonstrations were took place that overcome at first glance the political, sectarian, and regional loyalties in many of the Lebanese cities, asking for or demanding the resignation of the government and to build a new modern state to hold those who are corrupt accountable. In a nutshell, demanding the changing of the regime for a number of reasons that we would not be able to address in this context. The complaints and grievances became more. It addressed all the aspects of the social, political, and economic life aspects. So we started to see women demanding the end of patriarchal system or regime. Others were asking for the overthrow of the other political regimes. The slogan that represented the anger, the popular anger, does not believe in discrimination, and it was also violent. This slogan was also looked like the post-Lebanese war eras. The citizens were replying or reacting to violence using violence. This generalization ended in political identity, including citizens who respect the law or the rule of law, and somehow maybe avoiding the new political regime. And however, the culture of corruption in Lebanon that is deeply rooted, and this big division among the corrupt politicians and the citizens who use the situation was really excessive. They would allow the corrupt, the perpetrators to integrate themselves in an unknown group or bloc that tries to whiten a huge group or segment of the community in order to enrich it in an illegal method or way, while preventing the Lebanese community or society to look in a more objective and way during the war and after the war, in addition to the extended period since 2020. Another slogan from the Arab revolutions was that the people want to end or to overthrow the regime. This was a slogan known in other Arab revolutions, and one would start to wonder: is it really that they want to overthrow this regime in Lebanon that is being in control by a number of sectarian members and leaders? So if after when we think a lot about political idealism that we found in the universities among the youth, the need to overcome the need to work in a global or universal movement, to be part of this. The revolution went towards idealism among youth. I've seen our students and St. Joseph University trying to speak about the meaning of this uprising, and they were also looking for some sort of happiness, maybe, or I saw them refusing the geopolitical expressions, and they were trying to put their efforts. I was also observing them as they were reiterating or chanting slogans. The expanded participation by the youth in the popular uprising in Lebanon was a reason for it to be proud. However, it was a pride in the Lebanese society. All those youth and students were a pride because they were committed to some sort of political work, constructive political work that would change the nature of a regime in Lebanon. Some part of the Lebanese society would say that they fell in the so-called absence of values, especially that curses, insults became a unique way of expression in the public arenas. Those who were making doubts about this action or movement, did not know the war and were not integrated in the labor market. To a large extent, they were the product of the cultural world, even though they were not. They only knew a little about the history of Lebanon and the work of the institutions. They were politicized. They were also mobilized, and in addition, the movement was also a reason for certain classifications of violence on the Lebanese street, and it was less critical to this movement that deals with the regime. And this revolution became an identity to everyone, despite the social interruptions that was bringing back the war devils to Lebanon and bringing the Lebanese to more anxiety. The queues before the bakeries and oil gas stations were also too many, and were bringing back rumors of physical violence, hatred, and intimidation. So based on this, Lebanon started to witness a discussion about what is this revolution? Is it a revolution? Is it a rebellion? Or is it an uprising? This discussion was ongoing in the St. Joseph University, and there were many leaflets. Some relied on the theory, the Jacques Ellul that was published in 1972, in which he says that the revolution in the Marxist meaning is impossible nowadays, because liberty and liberation have started to be replaced by physical comfort. Today we are struggling to improve our circumstances in a world that accepts its aspects and features, as opposed to imposing the counter reality. The revolutions do not intimidate the regime, but they weaken the governments while causing reforms by forcing the social partners to go into negotiations. There are two main aspects of the revolution: the lack of tolerance, and also the accusation against the enemy. also imposing the WhatsApp tax on Lebanon is only exceeding the limits and making the daily life intolerable. Also, what distinguishes the revolution in its traditional concept about rebellion and its and the new or modern, there are commonalities between the traditional and the modern meaning. Is that in the traditional or classical mean, the revolution needs to be institutionalized, as opposed to rebellion that endeavors towards making a change and to also applying the dogma on the ground. He also says that. He also adds that it's not a revolution that changes the societies, it's the youth today who go to the new modern proletariat and who are considered as revolutionists are not necessarily the engine for change. They want to take part in the production process. The expert intellectuals cannot be called as a part of the salvation process today. In Lebanon, there are a number of names for the intellectual movements, even though the common use is revolution. However, the variant nature of the groups and the motives or demands that prevent the reality from having any dogma or doctrine only makes efforts or seeks to apply this doctrine on the ground or on reality. And this name, the movement of a protests movement, which finds its way much easier in the media. However, this concept about the social movements is not being used a lot in the media or in the press. I mean, the uprising idiom is not used a lot in the media, and it is not necessarily that it has to include all the components of the protest movement. Regardless of the name or title, this revolution or rebellion was not an easy task, and that's for a number of reasons. First, the difficulty separating this movement from other political parties that are part of the regime and that are seek to redefine themselves and their lack of reluctance in demonstrating or trying to show that they are against the regime as they are part of which. The other reason is that the difficulty of the presence of the citizen, the individual, due to the mechanical solidarity of the community that is based on relationships. The third one is the difficulty penetrating the elites, the new elites, under the new political feudal regime. On the other hand of this, on the other part of this sphere, those who have doubts, they had questions about the difficulty of change. The questions faced by those who have doubts about this movement was this movement against the colonialism or against the new world liberal policies, or can we make change before these globalized elites? The wish to engage in this universal cultural sphere through the internet and the non-government organizations, to go into this global discussion that has nothing to do with the Lebanese reality, was a sort of for those who needed to express this protest, their popular protests, and finally, whether we want to choose to make this revolution look like a type of a new penetration in into the Lebanese society, whether demonizing this or trying to look at it in a positive manner. It has not been able to find answers to destiny serious questions in Lebanon. The political trends of this revolution are very different in this movement. The revolutionists don't have answers to what is the elections law that they want to have in Lebanon. What is their how do they see the ending of the sectarianism, the housing problems, the housing issues, the central bank responsibilities, the role of the judiciary following the August 4 explosion, or the role of the religion or the religious activities and their position regarding the Hezbollah in Lebanon. Today, some of the representatives of this counter-revolution, the question remains the same, and we are still trying to work with those who want to coordinate this change and how to deal with the political layer, how to overthrow it, or as we are still waiting for a new Lebanese president, or maybe a new reality in the Middle East after the normalization with Israel. With time, we'll be able to see if the winds of change would be able to reproduce a new regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rula. So we've heard about the public sphere and um, and the public sphere and so on. And we know that things are more organized, but this is the attempt of monopolizing or controlling the public sphere. Now we have Dr. Ahmed Al-Laham. Ahmed Al-Laham, good morning, all. And in this, Ahmed, I just please, can you commit to 20 minutes? Yeah, I do hope so. Okay, hopefully, yes. Thank you. So in this paper, I try to expand this discussion about this depoliticization as one of the use of the new liberal tools used in mitigating the active effect change that are able to regain the public sphere and to use it into the same reduction outside the new liberal in this new liberal change, the city has the state has changed many things, and up to lazy, it made a balance between the needs, and the role of a state has been mitigated for the interest of the labor that had started to monopolize the political arena and decision making and so on in the public sphere. This has changed it into an liberal that is changed committed by experts that try to prolong to make it in within the arena, within the state, and to monopolize its practices through a number of bureaucratic transitions through that was on making this change that is after the right and this context. It's about this consent. Liberal consensus is based mainly on granting technicians and experts a kind of legitimacy in accordance with a growing conviction that only dialogue that can achieve prosperity. And since this is and that decision concerning the state's public policy fall within their competence, and within this. Experts provide because they're the ones who can understand they were neutral, meaning that they work for reasons that do not relate to themselves, rather that this dynamic it transcends to the unnecessary differences created by the politics and its social polarization. And in contrast to the principle of liberal consensus, if we look at the political as a debate, this political model based on the assumption that there can be a consensus based on government led by experts leads to the creation of an authoritarian political system based on excluding society and its different forces from the political arena. This undermines the whole concept of effectiveness of political participation. Then what's the use of political participation if the decisions are taken by the influential few and the representatives of people are unable to bring about a change. The dominance of this political and social thought as a single framework for action was manifested in the classic left forces' acknowledgement of defeat in the face of globalized neoliberalism and their reaction and acceptance of the condition of the new game and their implicit this has led to as you said, to the damage control, and this collapse had tried to, and in best cases, to improve the conditions and the new case, a new game, without having a real force to have a new organization. This collab has made things easily and about complete the politicization. So the conclusion that can be drawn here is that this change in societal power relations cannot at least or take this form of consensus without the soft or violent guarantee of the society's inability to confront, that is, to mobilize and organize to confront the dominance of the market and the retreat of the state. And if this meant that we need to prompt and the decision making from the representatives of the world, of the people, and the ability of the society was linked to the economic policies in taking decision and stripping them and in the public sphere, then all this is linked to curbing. All of this is linked to the regime's success in depoliticizing society, the economy, and the spaces, and to ensure the sustainability of the monopoly of politics in the political arena, on the one hand, and curbing the agents of change and dismantling social structures in another. And because of the centralization for depolarization, so the one in this has taken a lot in the neoliberal political model. And these ideas weren't presented in the cognitive known, and that history has ended because it is the only system for such systems. And that's why the agenda of discussion, public discussion, that is controversial is already defined, and we can say that it does not abide to the public discussion that doomed to failure and in the public work. And so the work that is now perceived as is consensus is based on a third way that can take pluralism, as long as it's under the cultural differences or ethnic or religious ones, and not to be overcome in order not to be measured and discussed. So this seeks to engage people in the decision making processes, which has led to the shrinking of the that had found themselves outside the political arena on the one hand, and in facing the shrinkage in another. The current framework is what can be said their inability to understand, and which did not find a space to express it on according to a political agenda that could be moved into a national project, either by using violence or popular extremist right wing like Trump and Marine Le Pen in France. Anyway, this exclusion for decision making through deep politicization made this a part of the dominance hegemony. So politicization did not end. It's a methodology, but it is based on a unified understanding to what is politicized. And on the other hand, this systematic depolarization everywhere, um, especially through updating the agenda of discussion, depolarization, and the dominancy of neoliberal conviction and its ability to change, a deep change, and a new, and to replace it in a new system that is based on exclusion and in changing something that is and that the citizens were not keen to follow up on this, and the level where decisions that affect their lives make. And since this change needs the ability of an individual to make change and a conviction to make a change, then the ideological closure, as I call, it makes our ability to imagine this change and the awareness of our need for it is difficult. Maybe to imagine that it's the end of the world is maybe easier than to think of making a change, and having the containing the state for such a system for a change. And this singularity in this will make it is very that the political and social justice is there, and this is the end of the political horizon. And this is an added impediment that's very dangerous in face of the social changes that does not have the same tools that new liberal systems have in order to gain and build a new different awareness. Such circumstances are accompanied by the regeneration of social actors and the active changes in neoliberal, and that the classical neoliberals are tools that do not lead to making this mitigating this and adding to the social change. As long as this continues, this depolarization of the economy and social after this era, then talking about the political participation and the discussion, social discussion, will end by the engaging the people in the decision making will remain limited to certain issues like religion, and without addressing the main issues, the long term resolutions or decisions that should be making. And here we focus on the, it's very important to see that the newly globalized system had made the state itself one of the main goals. And that's why, in addition to using force, the state using force to use the new system as happened in Chile and elsewhere, the soft change as happened wasn't to happen without that the state would use the same ingredient and recipe which had mitigated the social and political issues and opened the floor to the new like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, to have to satisfy itself by making sure that it's maintaining its security without it getting in, and to have its discourse in line with the new system. I will move now to NGOs or the programs and the globalized, since they are part of this, and they are also they filled in the void that had happened in the new system. The change that is happening and NGOs, it calls for having new to all kinds of life, including the social, economic, and political change. After the system, the state has defined the political state and the projects. The system now needs new tools, new projects that should be led that make sure that all these spheres are in line with the work itself without changing into having collective social political programs, especially after the new changes that have and revolutions that have taken place around the world, and where these mitigate and that noted that these have been tackled such rebellions and have noted in a lot, and they noted that it's important to contain NGOs and to convert them into spheres that would add legitimacy to the economic, political, social, and development sphere that is non-politicized, and to regenerate it again. This is through recruiting them and asking them to adopting the system and institutionalizing their relation with a new state, a new project, as they are forming the third sector after the state and the authority. This is where the need had emerged to change these new ideologies to make and legitimize the new liberal project, and to contain and to mitigate the national struggles and to come up and reformulate the individual's thinking patterns with the concept of social work in its framework and undermine the opportunities of his imagination outside the new liberal framework. And through this non-politicized framework, in social life becomes a technical issue that would be led through experts and that lead the NGOs around the world. And with the increase of organizational and financial capacities from the entities, that some burdens have exceeded, some of their budgets have exceeded some of the states' budgets. They have now the capacity to make a big change in the way of thinking in making this social and political changes and the political agendas in the states. Now, the main debate or that makes the new role for NGOs contribute in mitigating the change is the representation. It's the success in linking the different, the marginalized and segments with the agenda that to take them in touch with the social interactions. This had made the NGOs in a place where they can update the agendas and the framework of the social work on the one hand, and other that this new position had given these NGOs to reformulate the reality of making the change and the imagination of an individual for its making, and to tackle the social outcomes, which is the perception that is neoliberal. This ideological authority, the cognitive authority that is owned by NGOs in its as in legitimate only spheres, have contributed in legitimizing and increasing the acceptance of in this political and social work, and that it's the only way in engaging, being engaged in its programs, and to state that the most successful way in mitigating the gaps that is caused by the globalized system is to work within the system itself, which had contributed in reformulating the individual social activity and made these cognitive issues difficult and complex. And here we need to note that despite the disparities between the NGOs' actions in the North and South, formulation and the relation with the states, there's yet the unified methodology that is the base of their mechanism and work, and that it's the basic of a system that is funded is usually to make it to the market society in the south and the north, and they became similar without forgetting that NGOs in the north are more monopolizing and because of the funding, and they found themselves a place where they can play a mediator to transfer this mechanism to the south through these NGOs, without that the latter play the role of a mediator between NGOs and the local communities. So actually, time is not enough to present all that I have in my paper regarding NGOs, but quickly. NGOs were used as tools to stop the changes, different changes, like the globalized programs. They're mostly programs that do not seek to find fundamental solutions, for instance, ending unemployment and so on, but to deal with them as a humanitarian and individual responsibility. Another example is the self-empowerment programs. This is to give the responsibility for their elating the concept of individualism, and that would serve the structural politicized system, and other examples. Such projects that were done by many different NGOs have these are the main cornerstone for social interactions. And in addition, that these have contributed in reformulating the individual and its perception of social activity, and have made it absented the need that there is a need for the structural social interaction that is, and that it's just give like um, this had led to the shrinking of the physical sphere and the intellectual phase, that where there is no counter awareness about the system and having a new perception. The second one is about the second pillar is through which I will show how NGOs associated with the new liberal system curve. These are the new that are based on the individual. These are in having the new methodology is about having the perception that they are able to make the change, and in making how what is the role of the individual in without the interaction of the state, which have enabled the individuals to compete instead of positioning themselves within a group that think of fundamental solutions. In addition to have a one pillar conception, making it a social change, democracy, and so on. All these unilateral perceptions had mitigated the role, and for and this made it very mitigated. And the third pillar is about that NGOs are able to recruit millions of youth around the world, and intellectuals and politicians who are able to make a change, which has confiscated one of the main elements of making a change. It's the human resources. The question now lies, what to do. Actually, it's not one person can provide solutions and responses to such a complex issue. But this does not mean that we should not have different perceptions to come out with something. First, I believe the social change cannot happen without having an organizational structure, and to form the new collective awareness in a political program that would seek to politicize this, and this new structure should have a new discourse, and in order, and this discourse should be based on the unity of the interests of those affected, and that the so change does not will not mitigate the well-being of an individual, but it will maintain it as well. So, for example, regarding the climate change, that is now the new um, that is now takes all resources, and one of the main reasons is that it's not something luxury. It's related to the sustainability of having the livelihood of people around the world, and in this universe. So it's not a political issue. It's maybe it could be the only option. And because the space before these proposed structures is limited, in addition to the satinizing this option, so this new approach mostly will be faced by violently, which makes it we need a long source, and a long and then a political new social political project that would take in the collective interest. Second, since the focus was on human on NGOs, then we need to rebuild this to be in line with their local countries, especially in the south, and to disengage from the globalized development model, which has become easy to see, and the failure to strike balance between the free market and the social needs of the majority of the world's population. Third, the restructuring of the educational system so that it ceases to be a base of for the production of the production tools of the system, and to become a transform to contribute to building a new critical knowledge project in harmony with the social, cultural, and political context in their societies. With this, I end and thank you very much.
Let's use the next 15 minutes for questions, for Q&A. Thank you. I believe the organizers were really good in selecting this title, the societal change actors, and the three main contributions or presentations were really excellent. I have a question for Dr. Rula Abi Habib. A statement or a presentation was an inclusive one about the situation in Lebanon. My question about thwarting, the ongoing thwarting of the youth revolution in Lebanon. I've been able to summarize 4 main points on my understanding of your intervention. First, the lack of identifying the aims of the goals of this revolution, throwing the regime as a slogan. They did not see a regime to be maybe overthrown, maybe in the details that I understood from you. The youth power in Lebanon does not replace the proletariat. And fourth, the nature of the regime and the sectarianism in Lebanon. This is an inventory that needs to be given the priority and be addressed. I think the addressing of these issues should not only be academic. We need to understand from you what is the main reasons or decisive reasons that led to this thwarting. Another question is to my colleague Mudar. To be presidential, the president being presidential in the counter revolution. Has there been a previous revolution to be a precedented? What do you mean exactly by this counter revolution that interception of this revolution? Are where the popular powers were controlling the sphere, the public sphere, so that the counter-revolution takes the position or disposes. What has been actually, what do you mean by disposition? What exactly has been taken away from the popular powers? We might take a number of questions and then we take the answers. There's a comment apparently on chat. I don't know if you see the comments on the chat. I did answer by writing actually on the comment that was on chat. So let's take some more questions and then we go back to the speakers. Hello, everyone. The question is to Dr. Rula Khouri. We, as you know, an agreement, the gas agreement, is expected to be signed between the Lebanese government and the Israeli and the occupation government, as said in the media, as said by the Israeli media. Would that contribute to lifting the revolution or change? And in your own opinion, why did Hezbollah accept this agreement? And entering into this agreement, does it mean that there would not be any future confrontation between the state of Israel and Hezbollah? Thank you. Another question to Mr. Abu Habib. The examples were about Jesus. University because you lectured there. I need to know, are there any youth action or movements since 2019 in other universities? Were they present? Were they involved? Another question. Political sectarianism, was it a slogan 2019? Is it an obstacle before the continuation of this action or movement? One more question. Okay, let's go to the speakers. Dr. Rula. Maybe Mudar wants to answer before me because I have a number of questions. I thought we would give you more time because you have many questions. I tried to say our understanding of the public sphere. It is not that we have a piece of land, who owns it, and there's a struggle or conflict on the property. Is it the public and they're assaulted by a certain party? No, we have to go to more in depth. The public sphere is not owned by any party, but any action we do increases our interaction with this public sphere, and thus whatever is oppressed is us. And when we are oppressed, the public sphere shrinks. It shrinks not as a result that a land has a fence around it. No, because this land, the peasants were unable to harvest it or reclaim it. Revolution, I believe, regardless of the maturity or the self factors, when, how, who, etc., as long as there is lack of equality, the revolution will continue to happen or to occur, whether organized, spontaneous, or through planning, revolutionary planning, or colonial war. Regardless, eventually the situation that has lack of equality, the entire world today are looking at the diversity from North Korea to the US to Putin to Iran. The entire world, this diversity or diverse or different regimes. One thing that the status quo cannot continue to be as is. This is something clear. And therefore, the revolution, the change is coming. There is a struggle on when it will happen, who would be leading it, and what are the results or the product of this. And this struggle is the same one on how to form the formation of the public sphere. There are powers who want to guarantee that regardless of the change of their interests would not be harmed, or that's at a minimum. And there might be, or maybe they would improve their situation, their position. They would resist everything that could affect or make a substantial change in terms of the balance of powers and their interests. And therefore, they try to be precedent in terms of the revolutionary work that is going towards equality, to achieve more equality and to achieve. So being precedented or proactivity, to being proactive does not necessarily mean that I want to, for example, to a revolution tomorrow and then this is not the only case where the words do not reflect the content or the actual content. Let me remind you of something. The reproduction of the human life is a precedent historically in terms of the production process itself. We are reproducing ourselves. For example, reproductive. This doesn't mean production or nor agriculture industry nor tools. We are alive. We can harvest the fruits as much as we can, as much as we live, and we reproduce ourselves as human beings. However, the production is the way of that we invented to continue with the reproduction. So the idioms really reflect the opposite. So this counter revolution does not actually come after the revolution, but in many cases it comes ahead of the revolution, like in Tunisia, Egypt. And this is the reason why those revolutions were ephemeral, because the counter-revolution was established into the political regime, political parties and movements, including the CSOs, the left wing, the Islamists, and the other opposition parties. It appeared later that all were forming a part of this establishment, of this existing establishment, with the differences, variances. The main thing that the revolution in Tunisia, for example, was maybe the most successful, the Tunisian in the Arab revolutions. I believe the only thing that did not happen in Tunisia, that they changed the constitution, the judiciary, the regime, the elections, the parliament. However, the only thing they did not change is the demands of the revolution. The prices were on the rise as opposed to being reduced, less jobs, and the social security was also went backward. The demands of the Tunisian revolution were the least thing, which all led to the situation that Tunisia now faces. This only proves that the powers that were in control prior to the revolution did not change their powers or did not leave their positions. In Egypt, for example, it was even more complicated. It was a more complex equation. I always wonder if the older regime, Mubarak's regime, fell in a plane, for example, on his way to for example, birthday party in Sharm el-Sheikh, and the entire regime died in the air on this aboard that plane. What's the replacement of this old regime? We had the Sisi. After a coup and a number of revolutions, it's obvious that the old regime has the strength to maintain itself, to oppress the revolution, and they're ready to oppress it before it takes place and before it's announced, even if if it were spontaneous, like the case in 2010. It was spontaneous, but there was a party to confront this spring. Or that's why I say the counter-revolution not only precedes the revolution, but also. Thank you. The counter-revolution maybe needs fuel from the outside to refresh or to restore the alliances. You have
so others. Dr. Rula. I will try to answer all the questions in one. I'll start with the easiest. It's about the St. Joseph School, the Jesuit University. All universities were part of the mobilization, and AUB and Jesuit University was at the front. They played a very big political role. The difference is that the Jesuit University is more affiliated to a system, a French system, Maronite, liberal political one. It believes in the entity or the unification of Lebanon. As for the AUB, it's more cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan. It's also more factuous, and there's a big mix in the between the parties. So I'm talking about the ideological trend in general. As for the slogan of the factionists, the factions that we say, it's in the and the political, they both were slogans that were discussed, and and I believe this is wrong by the movement, because and it's rooted. It's like what Ibn Khaldun talks about. It's this sectarianism. It's very difficult to uproot it, and this sectarianism does not have to do with religion. It's about the affiliations, the ideologies, that who is more threatened. Uh, and or to of extinction. So will and the slogan raise the idea of the reasons for the abortion of this mobilization. So I believe most slogans that were presented were exemplary and real in some way. And but we couldn't the reproduction process that we're talking about is there, and to an extent that. For instance, the presidential elections and the candidates up to now, we're still having names like the son of so and the figures and so on. So we're still stuck to this reproduction cycle. As for the main reasons for the abortion of this mobilization, I don't know if it's completely aborted. We had, for instance, one representative. Now we have 13, so agents of change. So if we take the demography or that our the conventional or traditional politicians have become older, we know that the future is for those the actors of change for sure. But what they've tried to make new was aborted, the new techniques, because there's no agreement between them, no consensus. And internally, if we see the struggles that took place and the conflicts that took place between the actors of change in Lebanon, we see that we're still, as even actors of change, we're still followers of the traditional policy, and that which means that some of them made it to the parliament with a good number of votes that were gotten by the conventional parties. Uh, there's something unique in Lebanon, different than in the Arab world. It's that we and there's no system. We mean the state had fallen apart in 1974, and then it was reformulated by those who had led to its fall apart. So, and these were the same who went down when the mobilization had formed. A big part of this mobilization and so this interaction is not really well understood. Who is against who is with who? Now we're starting to understand things. The agents of change have to now are obliged to vote in the parliament and to come with projects that would lead to change. So we don't now we will start to see who was with or against this mobilization. And I think one of the main reasons for the this mobilization is the structure in the Palestinian and the Lebanese society. I don't know if we are asked to get out of it or not, because this is a very linked and close society. As for the question about the signing of the agreement, will the revolution be dismantled? Actually, the revolution, and since we've listened about that, they come to an agreement between Lebanon and the state of Israel. Well, there was this type, and this is by those agents of change, that there was this objection that this agreement did not go through the parliament. And there's the Article 52 about agreements, international agreements, and things to do with um, uh, uh, major agreements, since Lebanon does not agree with does not acknowledge the state of Palestine, so it was not passed to have the consent of the parliament. So this was looked upon as if it was a victory to Hezbollah. And why did the um, um, Hezbollah, and according to what Hezbollah claims, this Hezbollah claims that it does not take on a war because it likes the war. And if Israel is like working on the Karij field and they have to get hold of them, then they would facilitate or pave the way for such agreements. And it also guarantees that it's the main partner in this victory, because it was a pressuring tool to hit the platforms and others, and that this paper, the paper of Hezbollah, is the paper that should have been played, the card that should have been played by Lebanon during the agreement, the signing of this agreement. Well, does this mean that we're out of this conflict between or confrontation between the two states? I don't know. Nobody knows. I think we still need time to understand how did this happen under the U.S. auspices. There are many accusations to Hezbollah that it's the partner with the U.S. in this demarcation. So things are still mixed. All cards are still mixed. We really still need time to understand better. I hope I did not take long and so on.
And if you have any comment or intervention? Not really, I'm fine. It's 12:44 and the lunch will be in the building above Bank Palestine, across from the law school. Thanks for the speakers. Thank you all. It's been a very rich session with concepts. The next session would be at 1:15. Thank you. Hello, everyone on Zoom. I think we need another 10 minutes to finish lunch. Good afternoon. We welcome you again in the conference on societal change, societal change. We welcome you in the second session titled Experiences and Palestinian Experiences and Cases. This session, as you all know, has three main speakers. They're Miss Jawida Mansour, Mr. Ibrahim Rabaya, and Mr. Assam Yunus. On the podium, we have Dr. Ibrahim Rabaya, while the other two speakers are on the virtual, are online. The first paper is entitled A Woman Rises as a Societal Change Maker, Engineering Challenges and Prospects by Ms. Jawida Mansour. She is an engineer, a Palestinian engineer from Jenin, and she currently resides in Qatar. Her research includes resisting the occupation, rural tourism, cultural heritage, and community development. Prior to giving the floor to Ms. Jawda, I would like to remind the speakers that each intervention has only 20 minutes. Please be committed to this time, and we will, of course, remind you after 15 minutes. Ms. Jawda, please. Hello, everyone. First, I would like to pray for the families of the martyrs in Jenin and other homeland to give them patience. I would like to thank Muwatin Institute for Democracy and Human Rights for inviting me to take part and present my paper titled A Woman Rising as a Societal Change Maker in Jenin, which comes within a number of research I conducted in the recent years on societal initiatives by grassroots organizations and individuals to preserve the cultural heritage in Palestine. With the absence of sovereignty on the land and antiquities, the responsibility to preserve the Palestinian cultural heritage was transferred to the CSOs and individuals who are interested and seek to, in addition to preserving the heritage, to make change, positive change in their communities. Also, among those who inspired me to conduct this research was Martyr Khalid al-Assad, the Syrian antiquities scientist whose head was cut off by the Daesh, by the ISIL organization. I will be presenting today the paper and its objectives, summary and objectives of the paper, methodology in the fieldwork, and the main challenges and resilience strategies in confronting the challenges. First, I would like to give you a summary of the paper. The cultural heritage is used as a social and economic driver through creating job opportunities, especially employing women, mainly housewives who are able to work at home without having to go to the place of work and leaving their children. It is also a means to make strategies to reduce poverty and development tool for the community in order to increase its resiliency across the in addition to Palestine that witnessed in the past decades as prosperity in using the heritage and the cultural resources to support the Palestinian resilience. Therefore, competition is on the right to benefit economically and politically from the cultural heritage. The Palestinian cultural heritage has been subjected systematically to different types of cultural stealing since the British Mandate. However, it has increased with the announcement of the Zionist establishment on the land of 1948, marketing the Palestinian heritage regionally and universally as an Israeli heritage that includes the cultural locations, the kitchen, the Palestinian cuisine, and even arts, craftsmen and crafts, including the traditional costumes that the Israeli models and the Israeli stewardess on the Al Al Israeli airplane has been using. So understanding the Palestinian heritage practices overlaps with the culture and the arts and the transnationalism and anti-colonialism policies. There recently there is a concern and interest in projects to develop women, especially the marginalized ones, and with the Israeli strict procedures and the racial discrimination wall following the second intifada that only contributed to the deterioration of the economy in the area has made many of the grassroots organizations to focus on economically empowering the women. And this study was based on interviews with women workers and beneficiaries from two grassroots organizations in the governorate of Jenin. They are the Women Center in Ya'bad and the Najd, the Social Association for Women Development, and a number of activities, women activities of the CSOs in the governorate of Jenin. The vocabulary such as the marginalized groups or marginalized women are constitute the mainstream in the funded development projects. And this could take different types of resilience or resistance, and focusing on audio events such as organized rebellions or collective work ignores easily the accurate forms and active forms of daily resistance. I have talked in another job about the sort of craftivism among the groups that are involved in embroidery, and it's a group supported by CF Greer, and they seek to do changes in the Palestinian social and political change. I noticed they have daily attempts to change the social or political reality in the Palestinian groups or Palestinian areas. I here come to the main challenges and counter strategies. I would be focusing on some challenges and strategies and how to confront these challenges, mainly the development programs that target marginalized women rely on the dependence, the physical, the material and financial independence of women and their economic empowerment as a main entry to, or a main approach to enhance the participation of women in the public and political life. As Salam Abu Bakr said, who owns the money, owns the power, and thus the women becomes decision makers, political decision makers. And since this relies on the industrialization of heritage products in the Jenin governorate that relies to a large extent on agriculture, there's a big problem facing the women's work and the feasibility of their work, especially in the marketing of these products. And there is a big degree of competition, and that makes that are prepared by some from transparent materials with the shortages by the Ministry of National Economy and the Ministry of Health in checking the quality of these products. Some of the CSOs, experts in the governorate, say the main tool to empower these women is the presence or the existence of a regime or a policy that protects these traditional products, such as productions that make the women guarantee the effectiveness of these programs, of these production programs. I would go now to another kind of analysis, that is the reliance on the Israeli economy. the Israeli hegemony on the Zionist hegemony appears in the different aspects or foundations of the Palestinian economy that has become a consumptive economy, and the marketing of the Israeli products as opposed to the Palestinian products. And the lack of the sovereignty, the Palestinian sovereignty on the land and the resources based on the Oslo Accords of 1993 and the economic Paris Protocol agreements, all agreements that allowed the Palestinian National Authority to control and to have control and administer the affairs of the Palestinian people without having control over the land, the resources, and the crossings, and without even issuing a national currency, which made the Palestinian National Authority lack the ability and the instruments or the tools and the authority over their own land, and also which serves as an obstacle to the sustainable development. In the recent years, the PNA tried to implement the disengagement, the economic disengagement plan from the Israeli side, economic disengagement plan, and enhancing the Palestinian products approved by the Central Council of the PLO back in March 2015. All that emphasizes again that the October 2018, October Frehat 2022, this plan, a plan that goes in line with the so-called the resistance economy and the strategy, the counter strategy against the hegemony, which aims to obstruct or impede the current political situation and the economic alliance. Speaking about the foreign funding, and aside from the Zionist occupation and the weakness of the Palestinian Authority, the development, foreign funding for projects empowering women is accused of de-development in the marginalized areas as opposed to its objectives. Tracking Tamam Qannawi, an activist in the feminist work, feminist and community work since 1981, she says that the community goes towards the worst. The community work previously used to be much more, what used to be better, and the spirit of voluntary work used to be much more, whereas men used to be in solidarity and used to be more harmony. However, the space for women who in the 70s and 80s of the last century played their role in the struggle. However, in the 80s, women were in the public life more than today. The funding, the funders or the donors today who send the money and to the Palestinian institutions following the Oslo had impact on the community work. Previously we used to pay from our own pockets with complete happiness. However, today we pay for women for them to continue. We have to pay them their transportation and like light meals in order to convince them to come to take part in any cultural or awareness program. The associations increased, and the Women's Center became also made our life, made a copy of some. Even though there is a feminist movement which has become a phenomenon in the governorate, women participate in marches and solidarity sit-ins. They go out to courses in Jenin and from Jenin to Ramallah. However, their participation remains limited and is not expanding when at the level of the elites, and it's not the grassroots, as Iman Nazal says. Other challenges is the confidence, the lack of confidence by the civil society institutions, as clarified by Tamam Qannawi. She says, why do I have to come to you? What do we get or what do we gain out of me if you are not benefiting? You will not invite me. So the people don't have trust in the associations. They rebuilding the trust or the confidence between the community and the grassroots, and expanding the community impact circle, the research centers who appreciate the initiatives of women's efforts, such as Hamlet, the campaign As If It's Me, that was launched by the Women's Center, which targets women who work, who have businesses, and whose businesses are known with their names. Among the beneficiaries was a girl, Maha, who contributed to making this one of the small libraries in Jenin a success. Of course, she doesn't own it, or the campaign Women Who Did Not Give Birth, that targets sisters who raised up their little children after they became orphans, and the campaign Patient Mothers, who that targets women who were patient for their children with disabilities. In addition to also the women who work during the emergency, the COVID-19 emergency with the municipality. In addition, strategies in facing the limited funding and the capital market values that are through the Palestinian society, the participatory, the solidarity economy or the gift economy, and which Salam Abu Bakr, the head of the Ya'bad Women's Center, followed the strategic plan that started back in 2011, the rationalization in the cost and the expenses, operational expenses. She said we had chocolate of 10 kinds. The girls brought their own hospitality, like tea and drinks from home. We had to wake up every morning in order to provide morning breakfast to 5 schools. So this project employs 25 women. In order to achieve more involvement and by the women members, technology is used and creating WhatsApp groups for each activity. The other group is 150 women on WhatsApp through which they ask for support to achieve a certain activity, to exchange raw materials to make their products, and also asking for assistance to market and sell the members' products, and to exchange information about doctors or physicians, and also monitoring and tracking the movements of the Israeli army when they break into the Ya'bad town, in order for them to take the necessary steps or procedures. I could have read some statements from WhatsApp, shared with you some WhatsApp groups with their experiences, the number of troops, or etc., and also protection their kids and their loved ones. The work of women in traditional products constitute a phenomenon as a tool to achieve economic independence and to support their families. However, in reality, it's an expansion of feminist movements, socio-historical counter to the Zionist colonialism, to prove that the role of Palestinian women is to preserve the culture, the cultural heritage, and it's also adherence to her cultural heritage and land. I call from here to give more attention to the governorate of Jenin, especially the centers who work with women in the governorate. And as you all know, the governorate recently has been facing systematic attacks by the Israeli troops on all aspects of life in Jenin. Thank you so much.
As we noted, this is about the heritage culture, and women were addressed as like the fragile segments in the society, and through what it was called like the crafts mobilization. And most of her paper was focused on the impediments that women face. Thank you, Dr. Jauda. Now we move to the next paper, titled Colonization and Jenin. This is presented, it's by colonial domination and its resistance, clashing chaos versus felicitations in Jenin. Dr. Rabaya is a political science and political economy researcher and academic head of the policies and researchers at the Palestinian Research Center at the PLO, faculty member at the Political Science Department at Bezat University, and he's in University of Malaya in Malaysia. Thank you, Dr. Rajat. I will discuss in this paper the relationship between what's called facilitation as really is facilitations, whether it was systems or programs. And here, this is what I call the joint chaos engineering camp. And when I say the engineering camp, I don't say about the place as much as I'm talking about the case and what it expresses. I will start. As for facilitations that were seen and have increased engineering in 2005, did not bring in the spirit of attacks and political mobilization as what happened in Jenin's context, which I will address later. Despite that the linkage of many sectors from the city and the camp and the rural areas in such facilitations, this is what created some beneficiaries who beneficiary groups who some confront this resistance for their own interest, and this is the a model of Jenin that has been presented. This is what I will go to discuss in details. 2007, 2009 have witnessed big as a, by the quartet that it was a model that would push towards regaining peace in the West Bank through the national authority that was described as the moderate in return of the extremist Islamist movements in order to make it to a productive negotiations. Despite the political authority and executive committee that it's the responsibility of the quartet to push Israel to stop its settlement activities. However, this model had been launched in Jenin in May 2008 through what was called a peace and hope movement. This peace and movement, this peace and smile has movement have allowed the movement under the slogan of sovereignty um, prevalence that was erupted after the demolition of the infrastructure of the West Bank after March and April 2002. This was preceded in 2005 by forming two committees to follow up and the refugee, the those attacked and those who are followed by after they've signed pledges that in order to get the amnesty from Israel after a sequence of things and which limited its their movement and travel in line with the security and political path. It was its peak in Annapolis conference end of 2007. The convoy of the quartet, Tony Blair, had architected an economic plan that was called the Hope. It's a comparative that was tested by different administrations that was based on economy. Blair presented at the beginning the meeting of 50 Palestinian businessmen with 50 Israeli businessmen to have joint projects on the Green Line borders, and that Palestinian businessmen will given BIB cards. In 2008, the U.S. Minister State of minister when it visited Condoleezza Rice, she visited Jenin, and she saw that nothing is impossible, and she really promoted the practice of 2000 and performance of the Palestinian security force had gone way far to be able to expose all these practices. Despite some projects that were presented by the Palestinian government in coordination with the quartet and donors and the facilitation of Israel on the Jalama crossing. However, Israel was preparing its system in its vision on two bases. That the first is the covering or packaging, and the second is unilateral. Israel, it tries systematically and cumulatively since its occupation 1967 to encompass the borders of 1967 politically and socially to make so that it controls the elites in very well studied borders. This cannot be considered as Yes, and even the idea of separation was there always in the discussions of the with the Israeli government 1967. However, Rabin had revived it after 1992, especially with the separation plan of 1995, in line with its the Israeli fundamentals. All despite the negotiations with Olmert and so on, this have been established in the Intifada, and this is about not having a Palestinian partner. This is what was reiterated in 2006, that we're not going to withdraw militarily because we don't have a partner. So the complete transformation of lands in the West Bank and the giving it to Palestinians will happen only after having a Palestinian Authority that can prove that it will be able to fight terrorism. So the meaning that the Palestinian Authority is requested to and demanded to provide to prove that it is able and adequate to fight and combat terrorism. Then Herzliya conference in 2009 clearly presented this vision, economic vision, in its own document, which had where it was referred to two points, main points. It's the establishment of civil and military infrastructure, and here I quote, which serves the well-being of Palestinian people and encouraging commercial activities in Judaism and the West Bank, and which here promoted the need to promote the investment climate. Examples of this, and I'm talking here about Jenin, the Jenin state where there was a tangible change, where we see security and economic stability, which was achieved because of the police forces and the projects of the EU. So Jenin wasn't selected randomly to be the case, the pilot for the political and economic transformation. And here the report that evaluates the Jenin in 2009, and this Jenin was selected. It was one day the place of suiciders, and I quote from the quartet that works with the Palestinian Authority and Israel as a way to examine how can this elevate the dire economic situation, which first the Al-Jalame crossing. Al-Jalame crossing is where the flow comes in and out of the city, and even from 2009, only a limited number of Palestinians were able to cross it, and it was by foot. And since it was, and although this crossing, Jenin's is basically agricultural and economic, so its movement was limited. Today, 3,000 cars come to Jenin, vehicles come to Jenin from the 1948 lands, and the number increases by the weekend, which means 80% of the market movement. Also, this crossing guarantees the commercial trucks moving from Jenin that release their goodies door to door to transfer the commodities, as happens in this sector. As for the donor return, Jenin has benefited from this, especially after the Paris Protocol and the Sustainability and Development Plan in 2008. This had reflected the economic growth, and it had allowed that laborers and traders in 2009 to 2000 to move on. And in 2020, Israel has facilitated the bigger flow of Palestinians into the 1948 lands and establishing 12 electronic gates. Every day, there's around 11,000 workers move. Officially, they go from Jenin to Israel. As for the banking facilities, Jenin has benefited from this as other areas. And the loans that were presented by the banks, provided by the banks in the first half of 2020 was $376 million. The main point here is the informal exits or and according to the Palestinian to the Israeli security, there's a big number who are security bad to get into Israel. So this is where Jenin stood out. It had many openings and many informal workers flowed into Israel and without being noticed by Israel. And but this was stopped recently. In parallel, the civil administration have launched its campaign about the security lifting. Lately was the campaign to lift the security um, um, uh, force in the camp, and they've targeted 125 Palestinians that were banned to enter. The products of this matrix, two main points. The first is the having new beneficiaries, and these groups have benefited on the and depended on the crossing, and it does not, of course, exclude all businessmen and merchants, and it's not one group. There are different groups in different locations. This segment over exceeds the Palestinian structure, and many of them communicate directly with the Israeli administrative policy. So this is something that was stood in the face of in 2011 to 2015 and 16 in what's called the ninth intifada, and they moved from one place to another to encounter this intifada and to speak with the youth. In 2021, a manifestation from the fur merchants worked towards this crossing and demanded that the Israeli authorities open it, and that was after the emergence of the pandemic. A big part of these groups are part of this chaos movement that Jenin undergoes, and which preceded the struggle that's happening nowadays. Everybody knows Jenin, and all who go to Jenin understand that there is this chaos situation in the street, in the market, in the different life arena. The second point is to impartial the Intifada generation to make them in, because this generation was transformed from beneficiary from the facilitations to getting permits directly or after the security lifting campaigns, and so this started to work in the 1948 lands, or benefiting in stabilizing their work in the commercial field within the city. So this generation is keeping away from this affairs of the city. However, this system is there because there's this economic comparative that is based on not to be fragile and selective, which will lead to in order to lead real economic growth. This is what is referred to in the industrial zone in Jenin was and the cornerstone of it was laid in 2000 and in 1990, and but still nothing on the ground was achieved, and this would lead to in the transformation of the style of economy, and this is what Israel wants, and this contradicts with the packaging policy. As there was also a widening in the class gap. There's a new liberal system that is on with these distorted facilitations that to produce this the class differences that is increasing between the city and the camp. So this chaos and accordingly, Israel had closed its eyes upon. And as for the weapons, and everybody know the passing of the former governor of Jenin in this regard. Also, there are attacks more than one occasion happened between the security forces and groups of whether resilience or the camp or from the city to in order to confiscate weapons and so on. So it's clear that this chaos proved that the Palestinian security forces are incapable to face this, whether in the lifestyle or systematically. And of course, we need to mention that the pandemic had affected greatly the capacity of security forces to be able to control. And this is when they wanted to emerge in Kabatia, they've faced them and countered them and threw stones on them. What regarding the political dimension about the facilitation system, Israel did not stop invading Jenin since 2002. And based on this, because there was no Palestinian counterpart, which when we said it's a unilateral issue. Jenin has a lively memory. Students learn very early, at the very early stages, that Mahmoud Khattab, there is this poet that was done. Uh, and the Battle of Jenin, 1948. Jenin is the only city that was occupied, and then it was freed by in 1948. This is part of the culture that is known and widespread in the city, which makes it different than other cities. Chanting about its memory of 1948 and then Dina Qassam and then the memoir of the camp. But these are memoirs that travel from or transfer from one generation to another. There's also a contradiction between the Palestinian comparative politically and it's the political comparative that is related to independence, and then the military comparative which was able to be taken forcefully. What's happening now in the community, we see that the movements there is in 2015, there was this attack between Hamza Abu Haija, who was assassinated, along a number of resistance elements, and then these attacks continued, and up till now, this generation is making their own symbols, and they're not borrowing them from the Palestinian. They have a symbol called Jamil Amouri in Nablus, their symbol Ibrahim Nabulsi. So this symbol is expresses and is very similar to it. So this generation has benefited from this chaos situation where the authority was kept away. And I say this is and we see that this is the case where people this domination is still happening. So and this is what makes these clashes difficult to be fought by closure, by the Israeli forces, by closure, and so on. So Israel has two options: either collective punishments or closing the crossings, or annulling the permits. So with the specificity of the situation, it's difficult, and it had closed the crossing past September, but then it retreated back and opened it again, or the focused operations that are being done nowadays. Palestinian Authority have used, on the Palestinian arena, it took the shape of a long-term intifada, and I see that those beneficiaries and the new strugglers became this clashing became sure, and what's noted is that they have awareness and have the idea of reconciliation with them, and to transfer from being followers two leaders. Israel cannot also overcome the sovereignty it has. And what's noted here is what's happening on the ground is to prepare for the adequate infrastructure. This is new. This is part of the managing the Israeli conflict, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and can this situation and reality that's happening in Jenin and the clashing that happens, would it align with the facilitations, and can Israel overcome these ceilings and move on from these facilitations, maybe to a different economic status? These are all open questions to be discussed. Thank you.
So your paper addressed the Jenin refugee camp as a clashing riot space, as he called it, and addressing the reasons behind the failure of facilitations in dragging the makers. Now we move from Jenin to Gaza in a paper titled Change Actors and Spaces in the Gaza Strip by Mr. Issam Younes. Mr. Issam is the director of Al Mizan for Human Rights Center in Gaza, and also a representative of the Palestinian of the Human Rights Independent Commission in Palestine. Thank you so much. To my bad luck, I'm the last speaker in this session. I know that everybody is exhausted. It's a Friday, but I will try to cut it short as much as I can in the 20 minutes, even though our production is still on. We are paid money and salaries for this. Gaza was supposed to be Gaza first in the Oslo, and now Gaza is the last. In order to move from the gray theoretical area to the lively aspect, I believe Gaza, the first session was a very useful one by Muwatin. After thanking Muwatin and their for their good title address and the topics that were presented, the papers and the participants, moving from theory in an attractive way. We need to look a lot. Let's move to the reality that we are, the complicated and the difficult reality that we live. I think we need to get closer to the reality. Why do I say this? Because it's a very dynamic, you give us approaches like the reconciliation of 2007 as opposed to the reconciliation of the 2020, the siege of 27 and the siege of 2022. There are so many differences, so many things took place leading to many changes. The facts remain the same. I think it's important to get closer to the reality and try to meditate and try to reflect and to come up with something as we reflect on the change, as everybody is interested in change and what can be, what the impact of change. I think it's a really rich and exceptional topic. Gaza has also an exceptional reality. I believe there are main three features that distinguish Gaza. First, the unpredictable state. It's very difficult to predict what the situation is going to be within 15 minutes. And everybody has to have their own plans, their long-term plans, which is something really difficult. The community is facing developments on a daily basis, whether reconciliation, aggression, escalation, any basic needs, if they are available or not. At a personal level also, each and every one of us is responsible for their own life. If there is electricity, whether to take the elevator or not, to buy from a supermarket or not, if you to accept receive visitors or not. So life is going on a state of uncertainty, which impacts the lives of people and engaging them in the political circle. I think it's important addressing this topic in a more in-depth manner because it has too many effects. Whatever has been talked about, there's a lot that has been addressed so far. And to get closer to the change, which can also be under so many restrictions. The situation in Gaza is very fragile, and especially in relying on everything, not just Gaza. I think the idea of the establishment of the authority with the full awareness to be relying on the politics and the funding. We have seen later when the PNA decided to go to the UN to get the observance member. The next day, the authority was under penalty of freezing their money and clearance, etc. So this reliance is a chronic situation, and it's really very vulnerable. There are too many officials, too many responsibility centers or rights owners in Gaza. There are too many. Gaza is an occupied area before and after Oslo, and before and after Hamas's control over Gaza. And therefore, Israel is the occupier, is the main one that takes the responsibility for the humanitarian and human rights reality in Gaza. It should share the responsibility also for the Fourth Geneva Convention and the international law. So Israel is the main party in the bad and good topics. Or if we have enough time, we would be addressing the siege imposed by the occupier since 2007. By the way, it was before 2007, but after the control of Hamas, we considered it as the beginning, the registering of the history. The siege was long before that. Ever since the late Arafat was president, the siege was imposed and the restrictions were imposed on the Gaza Strip. The movement restriction on the population. Going back to the past, it only reminds us that it's an ongoing reality. By the way, the occupier is the military order. They announced Gaza as a closed military area when they first occupied Gaza. So the siege and the movement restriction is in the doctrine, actually. Given all the military orders, you would see that it's really established and dedicated in the military order, especially the movement of Palestinians and the goods movement as well to the Palestinian territories. We have also the status quo and the government that interferes in into too many services and that is responsible for the public security. And there is also the Palestinian police. And in the case of Gaza, it's a main part in the procedures, the penalties, the engagement and disengagement of Gaza, allocating money, resources, and also even taking also interfering in the employment of of the civilians, and this of course affects the political economy and the social aspects of the society. In addition to that, the other responsibility party, the other responsible party, or the fourth party, is the international community, which continues to be a main party in what is good and bad regarding the Palestinians and whatever is related to Gaza in particular. Going back to Oslo and the Israelis have successfully been able to transform the Palestinians from a proud people into groups. You have the Gaza group under siege and the 1967 with many catastrophic impact on their life, and electricity, water, and sanitation, movement restriction, and freedom of movement, crossings. Jerusalem remains, of course, isolated from the rest of the Palestinian territories, and they're also occupied by the Arnona, the taxes, and the discriminatory laws, etc. The northern and southern parts of the West Bank are segregated, and we know all the details in this situation. And therefore, the dismantling, the geographic dismantling of these areas, and also dismantling or fragmenting the Palestinian identity, and the risk of losing their identity that covers all the Palestinians. So also the time dimension is a very serious one to the Palestinians. That is not the Palestinians, the main actors are not aware of this time factor. They're divided, they're in a state of division, isolation, which leads to more facts about in many that there is no way back. This is an awareness created based on a reality that is formed. So the town factor is important since the establishment of the occupation state and the UN General Assembly decisions. When the state of Israel was born, this was final. At the time, they had the new facts on the ground and new realities. After years of division and siege, there are new facts, and there are generations that are born who never thought about anything except for the Israelis in their administering the Gaza Strip that is under the siege. The siege is not only a collective punishment. There is a process of development. This process takes Gaza back 50 or 60 years. So see, putting the generation, the future of generations under siege has undermined the ability to plan for the future, the ability to preserve the national unity. The good thing about Oslo, if there is something good, is that there is an article that emphasizes the unity of the Palestinian territories, even though they are occupied, but confirming the unity of the lands. In 1993, this was the beginning of the gradual segregation between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, taking things back to before June 5, 1967. I hope we have enough time to speak about all these issues, because it's an engineered thing. Regarding the Gaza Strip, the strategy is to keep your nose over the water. They cannot swim, nor can they breathe. In 2012, Haaretz published the Red Lines document, which was an extremely important one prepared by the liaison office, which is the biopolitics, where they calculated the calories, the number of calories multiplied by the population of Gaza, taking all the segments and classes of the society into account. According to this document, a human being or the citizen in Gaza needs 2,297 calories, which equals 1,836 grams of food, which is 25,755 tons for all the Gaza population. So this calculation was to keep the citizens alive, their nose above the water. They can't swim, nor can they breathe. This has nothing to do with security. By the way, segregating the West Bank from the Gaza Strip is an organized process, and that has also taken time, regardless if it were the Palestinian National Authority or Hamas controlling Gaza. I studied, I'm a Birzeit graduate since the beginning of 80s. We used to form 33 population of the percent of the students in Birzeit University. Today we have 0 students in Birzeit or Najah universities. This has nothing to do with security. It's an organized segregation of the Gaza Strip from the West Bank. I think this is the main challenge to all the actors. In order to speak about change, it is something that does not bear any kind of, you need to emphasize the unity of the parts of the territories, and this necessitates important and serious steps. In one of my meetings with the operations manager in Gaza, the director of operations in the UNRWA in Gaza, the children in UNRWA between 6 and 9 years old, I was telling him, why can't you visit them? Or maybe they have never seen the Al-Aqsa or the Holy Sepulchre. Why can't you organize visits, taking them from Gaza to the West Bank? Only those 6 from 9. Maybe they consider the 10-year-old a terrorist, or maybe 15 a terrorist plus. But why can't you take them on visits, on journeys, on trips, take them in UNRWA, coordinate, let the Israelis refuse, but at least try to do something. The Palestinians' main issue is their ability to adapt. There is a checkpoint in Ram. They would start to prevent the Palestinians from oil, from fuel, from anything. Millions have been spent on power or energy replacement, and the people are ready to deal with Gaza as a humanitarian and as opposed to political. How can the Gaza Strip have more food baskets, or how to have it more to collaborate with Gaza? It's a political state. I hope we can have more time to speak. Gaza, inside Gaza, we don't want only to speak about the occupation. There are things in Gaza that are taking place. There is a reality inside Gaza, the division that is controlled by the mindset of a clan. Gaza, compared to the besieged communities like Chile and those who are under control, and gates and barriers, complete segregation. This has led to so many things, like it has led to marginalized groups, of poor groups, and also another class of the rich and the Gaza. There is a balance. There's a balanced communities. There is the UNRWA or donors communities, and there is a parallel community, a parallel one that is besieged, that has a project. The owners of this project, this could apply to the West Bank. So we have the besieged communities. Even there are two societies, what they can lead to: devastation, or at least to get the minimal boundaries. Two things, I believe, is living security and the personal security. If both are lost, a person would start to look for. People need to maintain their existence or their presence. We have two things: either to go after the post-Daesh area or post-ISIL area, or the people who think about immigration. A while ago, I believe in about 23,000 people from Gaza currently reside in Belgium. So this siege or suffocation of the Gaza Strip pushes people, and I think this is an organized process. The Palestinians were uprooted from their own land. Today, there are requirements and reasons that force the Palestinians to leave their land, and this and the division also contributes to this. When things are shrinking, there's no job opportunities. And if you want to have a job creation in the parallel society, I am the head of the Human Rights Institution. We have people who applied for jobs. They were accepted because they have political backgrounds. That's why they are not accepted in certain jobs. Also, the service distribution is also deteriorating, and the services are under this kind of struggle, the struggle between the authority and the de facto government in Gaza. The harm was on the citizens, on the population. Today, all the cancer patients, for example, can't get treatment in Gaza because they can't have access to health, to physiotherapy, or to medications to go into a complicated processes. We are talking about a reality that makes you alive. So how can you make change? You need to stay alive. What kind of change you're talking about? I don't know, Doctor, how many more minutes? You have a minute and a half. This takes us closer to another problem, the civil society. The civil society needs to be reconsidered. The civil society is in exceptional contexts that are unique and playing roles that are not theirs, or these are political roles. There are gaps, just as the public service in Gaza are forced to stay home because Hamas wants to be in control. No community would accept this. There would be a gap, and this gap needs to be filled. The administration of the public affairs since 2007 out to this day, there had been so many changes, generations changed. After about the civil society has been subjected to unprecedented campaigns ever since the priorities were set. Gaza has been subjected to 4 or 5 aggressions during that, house demolitions, the house destructions due to the shelling of the homes and the killing of families, in addition to the siege. The civil society, head by human rights institution, has set the priorities, item 1 on the agenda, and accountability. By the way, nobody is subjected to the minimum by Israel. We are still working with the Israeli Attorney General. We have sent or applied or sent at least 100 complaints back in 2014 when the homes were shelled and families were killed. None of these criminal investigations were opened. All the files were closed. So where do the victims go? They had to go to the criminal court. We exerted pressure on the authority and the next day, because there is no statement, no declaration. We can't leave our people without the minimum support or justice. And of course, the justice cannot be maintained by the Israelis. And these CSOs were punished. They were defamed, the delegitimization and the defunding also against these CSOs, just because they tried to approach the International Criminal Court. This needs intervention, serious intervention, as opposed to organized campaigns of defamation against us or our professional reputation, or harming our professional reputation. Anybody who wants to approach us would have to think at least 50 times. In this respect, Hamas was incarnated a number of 6, considering 6 institutions as terrorist institutions. The international community is paying the bill of the occupation, continues to work with Gaza as a humanitarian case while paying the bills of the occupation without producing any security, justice, or peace. The situation stays as is. Hamas controls Gaza. Hamas closes and then opens for the Qatari money. This is the only capacity, employing 12,000 employees inside Israel. Is this a breakthrough? This is a shame. The institutions are now subjected to this suffocation, this shrinking of workspaces. Clearly, last week, the Prime Minister issued the non-profit organizations law. The non-profit organizations law that harms their independence and guarantees an unprecedented intervention in their work. Same applies to the associations. When the president and the General Assembly talked about the role of the institutions and praised the role of institutions, and the Prime Minister visited Al-Haq and then Al-Damir institutions. However, last month in September, a new law without involving any of the CSOs. A law has very serious impact. So it's an extremely dangerous and serious situation. There are too many changes in the social fabric. The community has become wants to live to keep and maintain its aspects, its foundations. Thank you. Now we open the floor for discussions. I hope all of you to introduce yourselves first and to mention the name of the speaker you want your question to be answered by. Apparently, there are no questions. Before we end, I would like to remind you that the third session would be at 7 tonight, titled Liberation and Social Movements. I would like to convey a message by the administration of the conference regarding the fifth session, or sorry, the fourth session. Tomorrow's first session will be on time. That is 10:45 at 10:45. This overlaps with the activities of the association or union activities, but because there are some exceptions, we have considered this conference as one of the exceptions, especially that the session will have a paper on the union work. Thank you so much all, and we meet again in the next sessions. Thank you.